everyone, it's Miss O'Neill here with your next lesson. We are going to be focusing on unit rates and unit prices today. And by the time that you guys are coming and looking at this, it should be Thursday, and the date is the 16th, okay? So going back to our previous lesson, we introduced the idea of ratios as being something that compares two values. A rate is a ratio, because you're still going to be comparing, but it's going to compare two different, very important, two different quantities. So an example of that is you went 30 miles per hour. That mph is your rate. You are talking about miles and you're comparing it to your hours. These are two different ways of measuring a quantity. So miles measures the distance while hours measures the time. When we were looking at something before, you might have seen something where it was like apples and oranges, and you're still counting the number of fruit, and they were considered two quantities, but they usually had something relatable in here. When you're talking about a rate, it oftentimes does not relate with what the units are. So you might be seeing temperature like 30 degrees at 2 o'clock. That's looking at you talking about the temperature versus the time, okay? A unit rate, very important. This is our goal for today. A unit rate is a rate with a denominator. Remember from our previous lesson, that's the bottom number. And we always want that denominator to be 1. That's our goal. And in order for that to happen, to change a rate, any rate that they have ever given you, to a unit rate, you simply have to divide the numerator by the denominator. Okay? So let's put that to some practice. Express each rate as a unit rate. Round to the nearest tenth when necessary. So nearest tenth means 1 decimal place. And believe it or not, when we divide, not everything is going to look super pretty. So we're going to have to make sure to round when necessary. Our first one is going to be 364 miles in 7 hours. Now, when we're talking about trying to set up a rate, we have talked about it using colons, using the word to, or using a fraction. When we're trying to set these rates up, we're going to want to make sure that we are using a fraction because we are told we have to divide anyways. Let's use the ratio that will help us to get to what we need to do. So whenever we're setting this up, you might see me use this little division symbol, a little fraction, and that represents the word per, okay? So up here, I could have said 30 miles slash like this per hour, okay? 364 miles in 7 hours. That's 364 miles in 7 hours. If I want to get this answer, remember you have a couple of choices. You can be using the calculator that you have downloaded or using your cell phone. You're just simply doing 364 divided by 7. That gives you out an answer of 52. Now, this answer of 52 can't just be 52. Here's the catch. You need units. So in this situation, what you have written first, in this case is miles, will go first. You can put the word per and then put your last unit, hour, last, or you can write it miles slash hour, okay? And the big thing to remember here is that you should have no fraction on the bottom in this sense because what we're trying to do is get it to represent just a value of 1. So when I see 52 here, there's nothing underneath it because it's 52 miles in just 1 hour. We have gotten rid of the 7 that we were originally given, okay? And so let's keep going. Our next one says 50 yards in 6.4 seconds. So we're going to do 50 yards. I like to include my units while I set up my fraction because it helps for me to remind myself how to write my units. 50 yards in 6.4 seconds. We go to our calculator. We do 50 divided by 6.4. And then here's what we get out. Remember, we want the nearest tenth, so I only want 1 decimal place. So this is either going to be 7.8 or I could round it to 7.9. In this situation, the correct way would be 7.8 because if I look next door, this 1 is not 5 or higher. So we have 7.8 yards slash, meaning per second. Okay? Jumping on down. Number 3. 210 words in 6 minutes. 210 words in 6 minutes. 210 over 6 would be 35. What are the units? Words per minute. As you can tell, that last word never has an S on it because there is not extra. It's just 1. So, jumping to the last one, 232 students in 8 classes. We would go and do 232 divided by the 8, and that would leave us with 29 students per class. Now, that division symbol is representing the word per. Like I told you before, math people are lazy. We have symbols for almost every single word because we don't want to write things out. So in some examples, you might see it be written out as the word per, and then in other examples, you might see it as abbreviated. So then it's entirely dependent on what the story is giving you. As we jump a little further down, number 9 is going to be one of those ones where it's a perfect example that you must read to figure out how to set up your unit rate. The issue we have here is in every single example that you have, you're comparing 2 different quantities. So in here, we have teachers and we have our students. And it's looking at the different middle schools that we have been provided information on. Now, you can, in this story, do teachers to students as 1 ratio, or you can do students to teachers. Because it's 2 different ways of comparing it, you have to be looking at the story, you have to read to figure out which one is the one I want to be set up with. And remember that trick, we always said look for the question mark that usually tells us what we must do. So it says the table below shows the number of teachers and the number of students at each of the 4 middle schools. Which school has the most, so we're looking for the biggest, most students per teacher? So if we want to set up our fraction for this example, on top will be student, on bottom will be teacher. So this is going to be a little bit trickier for us because instead of us working this way, we are actually having to work backwards because our ratio, the rate they want us to look at, matters. So I'm going to start with the first one. And when we're setting this up, we're going to do 840 over 34. And I can prove that. 840 students, 34 teachers. And when I type that into my calculator, 840 divided by that 30 is going to be 24.7. It doesn't work out perfectly. We're going to kind of leave it there for right now. And then we're going to go on to our next one. We have 675 divided by 40. I'm going to have to write it sideways since I'm running out of a little bit of space. That gives us 16.9. We have 604 divided by 31 would give us 19.5. And last but not least, 578 divided by 28 would give us 20.6. So, if we reread the question again, which school has the most students per teacher? In order for us to be answering this, the most is which one of these numbers is the largest. And in this case, we are going to pick Edgewood Middle School. And there's our reasoning. There's our math justification. So, looking at number 10. Jake, Kylie, Gabe, and Kieran take various road trips over the weekend. Whose car gets the most miles per gallon? So if we're looking at our table, miles will be written first over gallons. And so, starting out with Jake, we have 225 being divided by 14. I can also write Kylie as 312 divided by 15, but I can use my slash. 315 divided by 10 would end up being Gabe, and 456 divided by 16 is equal to something. Without dividing, do you think you know who has the correct or the most miles per gallon? Most people will think it's going to be Kieran because that's the largest number we have for miles. But remember, all of them have different amounts of gallons being used. So these miles are being broken up into different amounts when I actually divide. So if I look, we have 16.1, 20.8, 31.5, and 28.5. Who is the largest? Gabe. All right. So when we're trying to calculate our unit rates, the biggest thing here is that we're just dividing, okay? Where it comes into play, where it is relevant, is, believe it or not, when you go to the store. How many times have you walked into a store and you've seen these signs that talk about buy 3 for $5 or buy 10, get it for $10? Whenever you see those kinds of things, the biggest thing that you have to ask yourself is it really the better buy? Am I really getting the most amount of food for the price that they're offering? So if we're looking at unit rates with price, that's obviously meaning cha-ching, cha-ching. So unit prices that give the cost per one unit, okay? Remember, meaning one item. So if I just bought one item, how much is it going to cost me? This is especially helpful when comparing shopping in order to find the best deal. When finding a unit price, always divide the price by the quantity. That means there is no thinking of who should be written first. If you want to calculate unit price, you will be putting the money on top, divide by the number of items every single time. So, taking a look at number 11, it tells us $9.40 for 5 cans of soup. If I want to set that up, money goes on top, dollar sign in here is $9.40. And we have 5 cans of soup. Putting that into our calculator, we have 9.40 divided by 5. Gives us 1.88. This looks just like money. I could see this at a price tag, so there's no need for me to think about if I have to do any rounding. I can write it just as is. And we will put that as 1.88. But remember, just like our previous example, units matter here. This is $1.88 for how many cans? This is for 1 can of soup. Remember, the reason why it's a unit rate is because I'm trying to break that bottom number down to just 1. How much is it for just 1 item? Sometimes what you might see in your story is that they will mix up the order a little bit. You're not going to stress because you know if you're trying to calculate unit price, money goes on top, number of items go on the bottom. So if I want to calculate the price, a unit price, for a box of 210 tissues for $3.19, we would put $3.19 over 210 tissues. Typing it into my calculator, we have 3.19 divided by 210. There we go, having a huge, obnoxious answer. This is definitely not something that I would see on money. So when we're trying to think about money, you are only allowed to have 2 decimal values after the point. So this is either going to stay 0.01 or it can round up to 0.02. If I look at that number 1, we have to decide, stay or round up. Looking next door, my neighbor is 5, so that means we are going to add 1 more. This is actually going to say that it costs about 2 cents, 2 cents per tissue. So for one tissue you use, you owe someone 2 pennies. I'm gonna start to jump around here. So, number 16, a 15,000 square foot house for $119,000. Whew. Setting this up, look for which one has a dollar amount. That goes on top. Notice how when I'm getting ready to write that, I'm not worrying about the comma in my value. We don't need that for the calculator. And on the bottom represents the amount that we're looking at, which is 1,500 or 1,500. Typing it into my calculator, 119,000 divide by 1,500. And we got a long decimal. So if we're trying to round to the nearest cent, because we're talking about money here, we only are allowed to have 2 decimal places. So if I look at the second number, it's either going to stay a 3 or go up to a 4. If I look next door, it is a neighbor of a 3, not enough to add 1 more. So we have $79.33 per square foot. Okay, don't write feet, that means 2. A foot just means 1. Okay, jumping around to one more example. Let's do number 17. A case of 24 bottles of water for $4.99. In this situation, we're taking the money first, $4.99 over 24 bottles. Go ahead and put that in your calculator or into Google. If you are trying to use Google, you can actually say, what is the unit price of blah, 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 a case of 24 bottles of water for $4.99. You can also type into Google, reduce 4.99 divide by or slash 24, and it will do that for you, okay? When you do that, rounding does matter. You have 21 cents per bottle. One bottle, 21 cents. So where does this fit in, or why does it matter? It matters for this next option, the better deal. Think about you going to the store to spend money. Which would you rather? Buy something that is expensive or buy something that is the cheaper? We tend to want to spend less. We like to pick the cheaper option. And the reasoning for that is because we don't want to spend more money if we don't have to. For some of you, you're going to argue, oh, I don't want to buy the cheaper option because of the fact that it's going to be worse quality. That's not what we're referring to here. We're not comparing iPhones with Androids. What we're talking about is if I'm buying crayons and I have a choice to buy the 64 pack of crayons for $2.99 or the 120 crayons for $6.99, which one is the cheaper option? Which one gets me to buy a crayon for less money? Now, in order for us to do this, you're still going to calculate unit price, meaning you're going to do your money divided by the number of the items. So if I'm looking at option A, I would do $2.99 divided by 64. And when I get that, it's going to give me out, let's actually show you, 2.99 divided by 64. We're seeing a crappy answer, so we're going to ask yourself 0.04 or 0.05. We're going to do 0.005. And we would know that's about 5 cents for the crayon. $6.99 divided by 120. Oops. We're looking at this. Look next door. That 5 has to go to a 6 because our neighbor is an 8. We have to add one more. So, spending money, we always want to spend less. So option A is the better buy. Let's try that again. If we're taking a look at the next example, we have option A is 12 ounces of cereal for $2.99, or option B, 17 ounces of cereal for $3.52. So if we're looking at our choices, put your money first, divide by the amount. Put your money first, divide by the amount. Take a moment and see if you can figure out which one is the better buy, which one is the cheaper option. If you did your rounding, you would have gotten these two answers. If I'm trying to pick the better buy, I want the cheaper option, which in this case is choice B. So remember, if you're trying to calculate the better buy, you are taking your amount in dollars divided by the number or the quantity that you're purchasing, get an answer. Do that for both options and pick the one that is cheaper.